Hi, my name is Dr. Ruchir Patel. I'm a sleep medicine specialist with formal training in sleep medicine with a background in internal medicine, but also special focus in neuromodulation therapies for sleep apnea as well as insomnia, but even mental health. Let's talk about sleep.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ruchir Patel. I'm a full-time fellowship-trained sleep physician. Let's talk about sleep. So it turns out that as a sleep physician, I ended up having a sleep disorder, or I actually do have a sleep disorder that I didn't even realize that I had. It was my lovely wife, Rachel, who's with us this morning, that actually was the one to tell us, or tell me rather, that I wasn't sleeping well. So I thought as part of this podcast that we, share our personal story in terms of how it turns out that I wasn't sleeping well, but I didn't realize it. My struggles with, diagnosing myself, accepting my diagnosis, even treatment, and then even, discussing what I discovered about my wife and her sleep, which she also didn't realize that she had a sleep issue. And I didn't realize that she had a sleep issue until we went through this whole process. So I thought it would be a good idea for us to be able to share our personal story. So you can see what we went through and how we're doing now. And this goes back 10 years ago. So hopefully you enjoy. Thanks. So Rachel, do you want to kind of kick things off and talk to us about what it was that I was doing that I didn't realize I was doing?
Of course. So I'm, falling in love with this gentleman who's now my husband. And we are obviously in our journey together. And I'm sleeping. I felt like, I slept great. But when I would be with him, I was not sleeping so great. And what I was noticing was that, number one, snoring, which was a lot of times like the position that he was laying in, or, what we were doing, leading up to the evening, if we were having cocktails or no cocktails, all of those things. But what really startled me was I noticed not only was it a snore, but it was like a gasp. And that's, like, hey, are you, what's going on over there? And that really, I think, was the time that he actually took it a little bit more seriously, because
truthfully, I didn't even realize that you told me back then that I gasped.
Yeah.
I must have forgotten. So.
Because so much of it, I think every day as we make excuses, right, for our behavior, we feel this way because this happened, or he was snoring because we did this that particular day, and that wasn't the norm, right? So I think it just was a mentality that I think a lot of people have, where it's situational. So I think it took a lot of the new young love that, I wasn't a wife after 20 years trying to nag him about his sleep. I think he was a little more motivated.
Well, in my defense, I will say, though, I don't mean to interrupt you, that at first I was like, well, I'm a sleep doc. You're not. I think I should know that if I have a sleep issue.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I did have that unfortunate arrogance of, well, I'm a sleep doc. I should know if I have a sleep issue or not, right? So I wasn't extremely accepting in the beginning. I think it took me a few months to decide to test myself. I think it was when you said, if you're not going to do anything, then go sleep in the guest bedroom. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to do that. So that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak.
Yeah. I enjoyed sleeping next to you, but I couldn't continue, I believe was the conversation.
Yeah, I wasn't about to have that, because I have too many patients that over the years, that have what we call sleep divorce, so to speak, where they go sleep in separate bedrooms, and they've done that for 10, 15 years. And here we are starting our relationship, and it's like, well, okay, fine. I'll take this more seriously.
So that's really how it began, really was a conversation, and then each of us digging our heels in.
But wasn't I also, because I think I remember you mentioning that I would move a lot in my sleep, because I remember one morning when I woke up, you said, do you not sleep? I was like, well, what do you mean, do I not sleep? And I was like, yeah, I think I sleep great. I'm a sleep doc. I think I would know. And you're like, no, you move so much in your sleep. You're constantly tossing and turning and shifting positions where it looks like you're not sleeping, which I didn't realize I was doing. Because I remember you mentioning that back then. So
no, that's true. That's true. Because there were so many variables, in marriage that you're kind of getting used to in terms of sleep habits, right? So I had my own sleep habit. You had your own sleep habit. And if you remember, you always slept with music at first too. So, there was a lot of stimulation for me, who was really used to, sleeping alone. It was quiet. And I just went to bed, where you had a habit of, quite loud music. And between the music and the moving and the snoring, which you had denied for a while, it was difficult transition for sure. And, when you're not sleeping well, it's not bringing out the best version of yourself. And it might not be that it's impacting you, but it was definitely impacting me. And that's when I knew, and made after the few polite suggestions, the separate bedrooms, only because it was impacting, my overall demeanor, right? Of how I felt going into the day. And I didn't want to have that kind of resentment towards you of this is your fault that I'm not sleeping well.
Whereas I was waking up feeling great, thinking that
was your norm.
Life was great. And I was going to work and seeing patients, and I didn't think I had a problem. So for me, it was definitely an eye opener. After the threat of being pushed into the guest bedroom, I think I definitely said, okay, fine, I'll do a home sleep test. Because even though obviously we have, a sleep center and a sleep lab, I just didn't want to go into the sleep lab, not because I was afraid of it. I really didn't feel that I had a significant issue to warrant me wasting a bed on myself over a patient. Right? I valued being able to take care of my patients far more than taking care of myself. So I thought, you know what, I'll just start with a home sleep test. And if it shows something, fine. If it doesn't, then I'll think about going in and doing, in-lab studies, since home tests can underestimate or miss sleep apnea. But I did the home sleep test, and it was challenging because I think it took me like 3 nights to be able to do it, because I kept ripping the stuff off in my sleep. Finally, I got one night where I was able to get a recording, and I didn't even read it right away. I think I delayed it.
Yes.
For like a week, maybe. And I think the last thing I did on a Friday evening before I left the office was like, okay, I think I need to open up the sleep study and actually read it. And when I read it, my heart dropped, and I was like, oh my God, I actually do have sleep apnea. Mind you, it was mild based upon the data at the time, but it was there. I mean, I think I remember it was like 12 episodes an hour. I was having, closures of my throat. My oxygen was dropping, I think, to like 87 or 86%, which would technically place me into the mild category of sleep apnea. But as we know, home sleep tests can underestimate it. So it very well could have been moderate or severe. But at the end of the day, it kind of confirmed what you were saying. So I told my staff to give me a CPAP machine grudgingly. And I think you were out of town, actually.
Which is probably why.
Yeah, you were out of town. Yeah. Because I was so self-conscious about it, of having to strap on this mask and go to sleep. But yeah, you were actually out of town when I did all this, because I was like, all right, well, if it's there, I'm going to try to use it, or start using it when you're not there, because I was so self-conscious about having to put this thing on. But I took a CPAP machine home, though I didn't want to, just like, the stories I've heard from all my patients. People. Yeah. And I used, I think, the nasal pillows mask, which is the smallest mask profile out there that goes to the nostrils, because just like my patients, I only wanted the smallest mask possible. I fell into that stereotype. And the first night, actually, it was a Friday night. I was home alone. I set it up, fill it up with water, got the mask out, adjusted it, put it on, and I actually slept for 8.5 hours straight. I woke up in the same position on Saturday morning. It was like, holy moly, like, I don't think I've ever slept in the same position like that ever in my life. So I looked at my machine, I looked at the data. Of course, me being a sleep specialist, I started looking at everything, and I was shocked. I was like, whoa. And it showed like my events were like 0. I was like, all right, well, this is easy peasy. And I was like, this is great. Like, it's a lot easier than I thought it would be. And then then hell came. I had 1 or 2 good nights, and then after that, it was just a downhill spiral. Remember?
It was like 6 months.
Yeah, it was bad.
The struggle bus. Yeah.
Yeah, it was horrible. I mean, I honestly hated it. Truthfully, I hated it. I hated it. I was more tired going into work than I was without using it. My sleep was more disrupted than it was without using it. It just was a recipe disaster. And I became now irritable because I was tired and I was grumpy. And I was like, man, this sucks. And
it was definitely my fault.
Yeah. I was like, maybe I will take that, maybe I will take that ticket to the guest bedroom and say sayonara to the CPAP machine. But as I had to prove a point to myself, but then to my patient, because people struggle with CPAP. We get that. That's the biggest reason why people hate using it. But I needed to prove a point to my patient that I too can make it work. And the ironic thing also is I think my mom had started using CPAP like a year or two before. I think 2 years before, because we had diagnosed her when I was a fellow at Rush in Chicago. Actually, we did a sleep study on her there. So it was funny because I was actually asking her for help in terms of, hey, mom, how are you doing with CPAP? She said, I'm doing great. And she said, well, try this and try that. And like, here I am being a kid again, like asking my mom for help with how to get used to using CPAP. Like the whole thing was just comical.
Yeah.
But, ultimately, and I kept talking to my staff, the respiratory therapist, like I'm having this struggle and having this. Like I even reached out to the rep for ResMed, which is, the device manufacturer that I was using. And even the rep, Rick, told me, hey, try increasing the humidifier. I was like, but I don't have dry mouth. Just give it a try. I did that, and and it worked. Like I was sleeping. I had a few nights where I slept pretty well, and then it again went downhill. And I tried. Gosh, how many different masks did I try?
I don't even know. And I kept thinking about all the resources that you have. I don't know if it makes it good or bad, right? In terms of all of the changes, instead of being able to just really stick with something to see if it would be beneficial. But yes, I think the amount of like different masks and changes and everything during that time period, and the conversations that we had surrounding it, being able to then empathize with your patients that are struggling, because you wouldn't know, right? I mean, it sounds like, from someone that doesn't wear it like me, it's like, what's the big deal? Just put it on, go to bed. Like it's an adjustment, yes, but it clearly isn't. And I think that obviously changed your approach with the patients and even the services that, we've collectively provided now and resources, because some people are going to have a much easier transition than others. There's so many variables, but you had you almost knew too much, and you had access to all these, resources, which I think kind of hindered a little bit your.
No, I agree. And you bring up a good point in the sense that, like, you don't have sleep apnea. You don't have to wear a CPAP. You don't have to wear a CPAP at all. And it's like, yeah, I mean, what's the big deal? Just put it on and go to sleep, right? And I think we as sleep physicians, and I truthfully had that mentality as well before I went through this process. And after I went through the process, I truly feel that all sleep physicians should be wearing a CPAP machine to truly understand what patients go through, because I had that mentality. It's like, well, what's the big deal? Just put it on and, tighten it, make adjustments and push start and off you go, right? It shouldn't be that challenging. And we would, secretly get frustrated with patients like, why aren't you using this? But it's because we didn't understand it, right?
Yeah.
Because for me, like I tried probably 6 to 8 different masks. I even stopped using the CPAP. I went and got an oral appliance for sleep apnea that gets you to sleep with a jaw thrusted forward, right? Remember, it worked for about almost 2 months. It worked because you're not snoring, you're not moving a lot at all. I wasn't remembering waking up. And then I was like, great, I don't have to use CPAP. I was like, I'll just use this mouth appliance. And I was putting that thing in every morning. Remember to put my jaw back and get
back in place,
teeth back in alignment for 15 minutes. I did it all, like the dentist told me. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I started getting right-sided
really
jaw pain, TMJ pain. I didn't realize what it was. But remember, I was getting physical therapy for a CrossFit injury for my wrist. And my physical therapist at the time also did TMJ therapy. So I said, hey, I'm having this jaw pain. So he, examined my jaw and said that it looks like you have a slipped disc in your TMJ, which was triggered by the mouth guard. So fortunately, after a week of PT, he was able to correct that issue. But man, my heart dropped again. It's like, I got to go back to CPAP. I was like, no, so here we go again. Because at that point, I still wasn't doing well with CPAP. So ultimately, and my staff kept telling me, Monica kept telling me that, hey, come in, let us test you with CPAP and help you figure out what's going on, why you're not sleeping well with it. And of course, I didn't want to do that. It's like, nope, I'm not wasting a bed on myself. We have patients that need to be taken care of. They're first priority. So I didn't do it. But then ultimately, my last ditch effort, I think it was like June of 2014 now. And I started in December of 2013. I said, just give me a full face mask, the big fighter pilot mask, like people say. And I said, I'll give that a try. And and see what happens. And that was kind of the eureka moment, because that's when I went from struggling to sleeping through the night without any issue at all. And it was consistent, right? Because
it was. And I think so much of it is everyone always has that, like, they're feeling self-conscious about it.
Yeah.
And like, as a partner in the bed, it's not like you're putting it on and we're going to be intimate. Whatever's happening before
it would be kind of weird.
CPAP, I mean, unless you're into that. But, whatever's happening is happening. When it's time for bed, it's time for bed. Like, lights are off, you're in your position, who cares, right? But I think, again, that's coming from someone that's not doing it. So it's easy for me to say that, but me trying to support my partner through it was, what's the big deal? Like, you're going to feel better. I'm going to feel better. I'm going to be more apt to be friendlier with you if we're both sleeping better. So it is a win-win. But I think it was that same mentality of, I wanted to be as in your face, literally, as possible. And then, after you kind of went through everything, it was the large fighter mask that won. Yeah.
And, so these are the things that I learned myself by going through this struggle. Was I would look at my download report for my CPAP machine, right? And the things that we would look at as a sleep specialist when looking at a patient's report is, are you still having persistent sleep apnea events? Are you having significant leakage? To explain why you're having difficulty. Because I didn't have issues with dry mouth with using a nasal mask. I didn't have any kind of irritation with the pillows mask. I think after the first 3 or 4 nights, I started getting irritation in my nostrils, which is not uncommon. So I had to switch to a nasal mask that just cups over the nose. But I couldn't figure out, through this whole process, I couldn't figure out personally why I was struggling with CPAP truthfully. Like, I went through everything I would do for a patient and I just couldn't figure it out. I had low-level leak, which was acceptable, and it wasn't significant to make me think that was an issue. I didn't have dry mouth, even though I made an adjustment on the humidifier. That didn't correct the issue. Long story short, after I started using the full face mask, I looked at my leak report and my leak was 0, though my leak with the nasal mask was maybe around 5 to 10 liters per minute, which is actually very low. And it's not something that we would traditionally be concerned about. But one of the things that it taught me was that low-level leak actually can disrupt sleep. We don't have an exact mechanism why, but we aren't trained in that as sleep specialists. When I did my fellowship, that wasn't something that was emphasized. And even when I interviewed some of the other physicians that are in our practice, I would ask them that during the interview question out of curiosity, and they also didn't have an explanation or correlation. But what I discovered was low-level leak from the mouth, even if the mouth is open slightly, that can actually trigger the brain to wake up and or trigger one to physically wake up, or it can certainly cause a person to feel tired. Or even subtle dryness as well can start disrupting sleep. And we don't really understand why it happens, but it definitely changed my overall practice style when managing a patient with CPAP, because it made me more aggressive in addressing leak. And even during sleep studies, when we test a person with CPAP, that was one of the things that we had noticed as well, was if we addressed the leak during the sleep study itself, that individuals' brains previously with leak would wake up excessively, but we didn't realize that's what was causing it, even though the apnea was controlled during the study. And once we corrected the leak, the brain stopped waking up excessively, even though the sleep apnea was controlled with CPAP. We were trained in that the brain will wake up excessively with CPAP because that's just the brain getting acclimated to it. Well, in hindsight now, it turns out to be a bunch of rubbish, because it's actually not the case. It's not the brain getting used to CPAP that's triggering it to wake up. It's actually leakage. So it made me change my style of practice with my CPAP patients and getting more aggressive with controlling leak. And as I started doing that clinically, people started actually responding better. And I started to realize that, a lot more people out there can't keep their mouths closed with CPAP than they realize, because for the longest time, the field in general says start everyone on nasal mask because it's the smallest and least cumbersome. But it turns out that, in my opinion, I think 60 to 70% of people truly need to be on some type of mask that also encompasses the mouth, because most of us truly can't keep the mouth completely closed. Like, even half a centimeter opening is still a pressure relief valve, right? So that air escapes and that will start to disrupt sleep. So it really finessed my overall practice style, right? And it definitely did make me a better sleep physician. And I think our patients are better treated by virtue of it. So, in retrospect, all I can say is thank you, because it definitely did help me. I was motivated because, I have a strong family history of heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, stroke, the whole lot. So for me, in retrospect, I was just being stupid, being in my early 30s and thinking I was invincible. I didn't want to do it. But in hindsight, I think it definitely has been a good thing for us, for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Everyone in my family has developed type 2 diabetes, at least the males, by early 40s. And now I'm almost 45 and I don't have it. I don't have hypertension. I don't have any heart disease. My calcium score, my cardiac CT was 0, last year. So maybe this has contributed to, prevention.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a good thing, So, but I will also say, like, one of the things that after I went to the full mask and you started noticing I was doing well, I still wasn't fully captured truthfully in terms of how is it helping me, right? Initially,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Remember that? I was like, well, you think I'm sleeping well, which is great. You're sleeping well, which is great. You're feeling better, which is great. I'm happy to hear it. But I truly still didn't know how I felt better. So I think you went to Minneapolis for work, and you were gone for like 3 or 4 days. No, I didn't. I was like, oh, this is my break from CPAP. I was like, I'm home alone and I didn't use it. And the things that I learned was I actually remembered, I still distinctly remember this. This was that summer in 2014 that I was tossing and turning a lot more than I realized. Like, man, I didn't realize I was waking up so much. I truly didn't realize that I was waking up as much as I did those few nights. But I definitely found that it was harder for me to get out of bed in the morning with my alarm. I felt groggier, but because my caffeine intake had also dropped dramatically after I started sleeping well with CPAP, if you recall. I just would have a cup of coffee in the morning. Yeah. And I got rid of coffee in the office because my routine was always have a cup of coffee in the morning before I left home or while I was reading sleep studies. And then I'd have a second cup of coffee when I get into the office, and then maybe a soda at lunch. Remember how much caffeine I was taking before I was sleeping well with CPAP? And then once I stopped using CPAP while you were away, I realized that when I went to the office, I had to have another cup of coffee because I didn't feel mentally clear-headed. Yeah. I felt a little groggy. I was like, oh man, gosh, maybe CPAP really is working. So it really was a paradigm shift for me because I didn't really think that I had issues with tiredness because I never took naps. I never complained of being tired, pre-CPAP. And it was all in perspective in the sense that, at that point I was now, 4 or 5 years into my career. So I had finished all my training, the years of medical school, residency, where I was just so chronically sleep deprived that the way I was sleeping at that point 10 years ago, pre-CPAP, that was the best I'd ever slept in probably, 10, 12 years with all my years of training. So for me, I didn't realize that I had a problem. But when you were gone and I didn't use it, that was the game changer for me personally, for me to realize that, oh, I guess this thing really is helping me. And I could tell that, gosh, cognitively, I'm sharper. I was processing faster. I was more efficient. I didn't have to have extra caffeine. So that truly was the moment for me to say that, yes, this definitely is helping me in terms of how I feel the next day. So,
yeah. And I think so many times we're so reliant on caffeine. I think it's just part of the work hard, play hard, right? You're drinking it because you're extremely efficient. You're working hard. You're building the practice. There's so many reasons why it made sense because it's normalized. Everyone is constantly pushing to do more and more and more, and it just becomes a norm. And until you have basically a healthier mind, body, you realize you really don't need it. I think when we started really focusing on our health, that was, I think, one of the first things that we both recognized was we really need very little. And I don't even think I say need, but it's a habit. We have 1 cup of coffee a day and no other caffeine in our diet. And I think that honestly is just a, routine, a habit.
It's a ritual.
And it's not something that, feels like, oh, I woke up, I have to have my coffee, right? Where you definitely were needing that. And so that was definitely a big shift.
Oh yeah.
Certainly.
Even now, like this morning, for instance, I made my cup of coffee but I actually didn't finish that cup until
And it wasn't even
8:30.
finished.
Yeah, I just finished it Just, I didn't want to waste it, but
Okay.
But I did finish it just at 8:30 this morning. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it sat on my desk while I was working and reading sleep studies this morning for almost 45 minutes to an hour before I even took my first sip. So I don't even really need it in the morning when I wake up. My alarm goes off at 4:05. I mean, this morning I slept and I got out of bed at 5, but still, typically I'll get out of bed, by 4:20.
And there's a reason for that.
What?
Well, last night we were off our normal routine. We had some
Yeah.
wine
And we stayed up a little bit later.
And we stayed up later. So
gathering
it makes
at home,
sense, right? But these are the things that I think when we're talking about sleep that do vary, right? And I think a lot of people, to kind of go back to you acclimating to CPAP and wanting to know the benefit, is also having realistic expectations. So many of us need those motivating factors, whether, for the CPAP, okay, I'm wearing it. Why am I not feeling like Superman when I wake up? Right. And I think that's the other aspect of it is, well, did you feel like Superman when you woke up any other time? What's the expectation? There's so many other variables that go into it. I don't feel how I felt when I woke up in my 20s, but that's normal and natural, right? So there's definitely a difference when I sleep well and I don't sleep well, but it's never a time that it's like, okay, if it's that I'm taking on the world, that really has to do with all areas of my body and not just, sleep, right? So I think that's the other thing that as people are having conversations about it and motivating factors, having those realistic expectations and having them understand all the different areas in their health that it's impacting them. So it's not just, I slept better, I'm going to feel better, right? It's going to be all the other things that they don't see. Like when you were talking about, whether it's diabetes or their cardiac health or, even their weight, there's mental health, all of those things. So being able, I think, to talk about that is also helpful because when we have a narrow view of what the expectation is and we don't get it or achieve it, there's less motivation for patients to use it, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, for me, I definitely noted from a mental health standpoint that I became more calm, less reactive, less irritable. Not that I was an angry person at all, but definitely was more reactive, I think. And right. So, and I'm able to, process things and think through them more calmly. I think definitely I've noticed a change in myself over the last 10 years because of sleeping well. In the times that I don't sleep well, even now, for whatever reason. I mean, we have a 5-year-old, and when he was younger, he would, kick me in the ribs because he entered our bed, at like God knows what time in the middle of the night, and I wouldn't sleep well. And I could tell, like, even though I had my mask on, I had a toddler-induced poor sleep, and I could tell that, gosh, mentally I just don't feel myself because I could tell I was more grumpy and irritable and reactive, right? So there's all these other symptoms that one can have by virtue of not getting good quality sleep. It doesn't have to be daytime sleeping. It doesn't have to be napping. Like I said, I never napped, right? I was never a napper, have never been a napper, but you could have all these other issues, even cravings for unhealthy foods, right? I mean, weight gain, unexplained weight gain, poor exercise tolerance. I mean, this goes back to, because I used to CrossFit back then, remember?
I do.
But one of the things that I remember, because I'm not an athlete, never have been. And, with CrossFit, I got this new spark. Gosh, I kind of started competing against myself with weights and things like that. But I do remember that physically with CrossFit, I had reached all these plateaus in terms of my times and my speed and my weights and all that. And I just couldn't progress further. And then once I started getting good sleep with CPAP in 2014, at the end of 2014, I started increasing my weights. I started getting faster. And my coaches were asking me, if you remember, Corey would ask me, my coach, hey, what kind of supplement are you taking? I was like, I'm not taking anything. And I asked him, why do you ask? He's like, well, you were on this plateau in terms of your speed and weights. And now all of a sudden you're faster, your weights are going up. Like, what are you taking? It's like, nothing. It's like, only thing that I've changed is that I guess I'm sleeping better. And I was recovering faster as well, right? Whenever I would, my muscle soreness wouldn't last as long. So I definitely noticed an improvement in my physical performance as well by improved quality of sleep. And there's a lot of literature out there that shows that there's a correlation, right, with improved quality of sleep and better physical performance. So, it was an interesting journey to say the least, right?
Yeah.
So, and now honestly, what's the first thing I do when we pack to go out of town?
Yeah, you get it ready.
I get my travel CPAP out, which is
Yeah.
packed and ready to go. Because even if I travel for one night, I have to have it because I know one night of not using it, I will not feel well mentally in terms of just, I don't feel as sharp. And I don't like that because I work every day. I just don't like that feeling of not feeling sharp because I know it's going to end up making me less efficient. It's going to take longer for me to complete tasks and then take away time from us spending time together. So the very first thing I do, put my suitcase out and put my travel CPAP out, and it goes with me everywhere. Like I've taken it all over the world.
Yeah.
I think the only time I missed a night was when we were on our honeymoon.
Oh my goodness, it was hilarious.
I forgot one little part from my mask, and I was like, oh crap.
I know that was pretty.
I slept on 3 pillows on my
yeah.
left side, and every morning I woke up with neck pain, but I didn't snore, and you slept well. I actually slept semi well as well. I didn't feel tired, so it worked out. I'd have to stretch my neck. It was comical. Yeah. On our honeymoon, of course, I didn't have my CPAP machine. Well, I did have it.
You had it.
I just didn't have that one little
critical part.
Yeah, and it was during Thanksgiving, so there was no way to get it.
So
that was always fun. So, but yeah, so that was my journey with CPAP and treating my sleep apnea. So, but yeah, I definitely won't not use it. I do have my struggles and frustrations with it. I mean, there are times when I'll say, gosh, you know what? Maybe I should go get that Inspire implant and just put it away. But ultimately, I don't have consistent struggles with it. Periodic, it's going to happen. So, but now let's turn the tables on to Rachel. So once I started sleeping well, I started being disrupted from my sleep in the sense that I was sleeping through the night, not waking up. And then all of a sudden, remember I still distinctly remember, this was in our place in McCormick Ranch where you were going to the bathroom and I had those automatic light switches in the toilet, remember? And the lights would automatically turn on when you'd walk by. I'm motion sensitive. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have done that. But anyway, the lights would turn on and you weren't that graceful getting out of bed, nor are you that graceful entering into bed.
I don't think.
No offense, but.
There's no offense. This is the same now. I mean,
even now,
I'm graceful.
Not very graceful. It's just not when you're getting in and out of bed.
To getting in and out of bed, asleep. Yes.
Nevertheless, I still remember with my mask on, I'm like, how many times are you going to the bathroom? Like, what are you doing? And it's like, I don't know, midnight. She goes, I'm going to the bathroom. And you did it like 2 or 3 more times that same night. It's like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you getting up? You're waking me up too. So we talked about it the next day or a few days later. Like, I've always woken up at least 3 to 4 times a night to go to the bathroom. And I didn't realize that before because I guess my sleep was so disrupted as is pre-CPAP that I was never being woken out of a deep sleep, right?
Exactly.
So
you just would roll and it didn't matter. Like,
Yeah. So it was definitely something different. And I was like, why? It's like you're early 30s. Like there's no reason why medically and from a sleep medicine standpoint that you should be waking 3 to 4 times a night to go to the bathroom. I was like, you don't have any bladder issues. You don't drink excessive liquids. But I did the whole thing like you would for a kid, right?
Yep.
Peeing their pants at night. I said, stop drinking
don't
liquid.
Have any water. I was like
don't drink wine.
Bedtime,
don't have any water. Like I cut off our water supply, like 3 hours before bedtime, so we're going on a drought. And none of that actually worked, you still are waking up. It's like, what the heck's going on? And mind you, I already knew that she had a history of restless leg syndrome, which, of course, a person can experience pain and discomfort before they go to bed when they're still awake. That can interfere with their ability to relax, to fall asleep. But at that time, you didn't really have too many significant symptoms from what I remember. I think.
Yeah, I didn't.
Whenever we go to like music festivals or standing, right, for long times, you would have issues and you would stretch and it would be okay. But it wasn't a consistent issue, I don't think. At that time.
Wasn't consistent. It would be like overuse of my legs or standing a lot, excessive exercise. So anything fun that I would be doing, I felt like I would pay for it. The more sedentary or, busy I would get just sitting at a desk, I wouldn't have the issues. So it wasn't consistent where it was night after night. So I think that's why it really wasn't something that was addressed. And again, it was there was an explanation, right? Like, oh, well, we were just doing this and this is why. But it's going to be gone in 2 days. And
Yeah, it was pretty mild, right? And it just
Yeah.
was aggravated by like these things that you just mentioned. So,
yes, where it became disruptive.
yeah. So then, of course, I put on my sleep doctor hat, trying to figure out like, why in the world is she waking up 3 to 4 times a night to go to the bathroom? Yes, I used to disrupt your sleep, but now you're disrupting my sleep.
Mhm.
Got to figure this out.
Payback.
Yeah, I know. So I think I suggested doing a sleep study, but I think
You absolutely did, yeah.
were resistant. I think. Yeah. So we kind of let it be. We did all this, behavioral modification first, and maybe it worked here and there, but you were still
Yeah.
consistently waking up, right? And I think you told me that you were doing that since you were a child, waking up that much to go to the bathroom. But
At least when I was living alone. I don't know back to childhood, but in my adult life, I would just wake up always
to go to the
To the
bathroom.
bathroom, yeah.
So I think I remember, I don't know, at one point, it must have been 2014 or 2015, but I remember there was a Friday night or Saturday night. We were in bed. I was watching a movie. I'd already fallen asleep. And you were definitely well asleep, and you'd twitch, and then you'd shift position, and I'd keep watching the movie. I just thought maybe the sound woke you up. So I turned it down, and then you'd twitch and you'd shift again. And it was very distinct twitching because it was your legs would twitch in a very kind of rhythmic flexion type manner, and even your arms would twitch as well. So it wasn't like your body was being startled awake.
Yeah.
It was actually your extremities were twitching. And then I remember you did it, and I was looking at you. You had your eyes closed, and you opened your eyes and you looked at me like, why the hell are you staring at me? I was like, because you realized that you actually twitched yourself awake. And for me, like, I had a smile on my face, like, oh man, I think I know why you're waking up to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Because even at that time, remember you told me that you'd have to sleep at least 8 to 9 hours to feel rested.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah.
Remember? And then on Saturdays, we'd have to come home, after lunch because you had to take a 30-minute nap. And like, what's going on here? Like, why do you need to nap for 30 minutes? Remember all that?
Yeah. I mean, I would just
This was
be
even
tired.
before you had valley fever even.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This was before valley fever
Yeah,
time.
that was a whole other conversation. Another podcast.
I know. Oh my God. But so she had some of these subtle symptoms of, because nobody really needs 8 to 9 hours of sleep per night unless you have physiologic long sleeper. But even now, I mean,
I know.
when you sleep well, you don't really you need 8 hours, but not 9 hours.
Yeah, true.
But ultimately, what it made me realize was that, well, given that you have a history of restless leg syndrome, you very well have what's called periodic limb movement disorder, right? Which is a coexisting sleep disorder that can occur in people that have restless leg syndrome. So restless leg syndrome is an awake phenomenon, which can cause people to have a hard time falling asleep, like Rachel mentioned, when it was aggravated. But periodic limb movement disorder is a very subtle condition that only happens when a person's asleep, where you get these repetitive, flexion movements, most often of the leg, where it's almost like you're lightly tapping a soccer ball, or your foot's twitching, or just contraction of this outer muscle called the anterior tibialis muscle. But that movement, even subtle, can actually trigger a person to wake up, either trigger the brain to wake up, or in Rachel's case, at least what I was observing was it was triggering her to physically wake up. Times where her eyes would open and she'd look at me and say, why the hell are you staring at me? Or just enough to where she'd roll over. Or it would actually trigger her to wake up to go to the bathroom, right? Because we do know that anything that triggers the brain to wake up can actually trigger the urge to have to go urinate, right? So even in sleep apnea, one of the most common causes of people having to wake up frequently to go urinate, even if a person doesn't have a prostate, i.e. a woman, or a male is on prostate medications, is actually sleep disruption from sleep apnea or even periodic limb movement disorder. That's a common cause of people having to wake up to go pee. So that's what it was. Like, you've got periodic limb movement disorder because up to 50 to 70% of patients with restless leg syndrome also have periodic limb movement disorder, so they can coexist together. So that then started down the path of, well, we got to figure out why you've got this, right? And being a young woman menstruating, you're obviously losing iron regularly, and for restless leg syndrome, and we had never done this because your RLS really was never like a big issue. So I never ever suggested that, hey, let's do some blood work. But with this, we checked your ferritin and we checked vitamin D and we checked some other blood work. But ultimately your ferritin, which is obviously the long-term marker of iron storage, it was low. So I was like, all right, bingo, this is what we need to do. So, I started you on an iron supplement, right, with vitamin C. Which, do you still take that?
Vitron C.
You still take it?
Not consistently.
Yeah, see.
But I need to because I'm noticing some patterns again.
Yeah, I think that's why I sleep better when I'm by myself. And my sleep is a little bit disrupted when even though we have now a king size bed, and our toddler sleeps in his room
most of the time.
But ultimately, her iron stores were low, ferritin. So I had you start taking iron, and I think you were even started on low dose gabapentin as well, right?
I was
because the iron can take a while for it to improve. The ferritin can take a while for it to go up when you start taking iron supplements. So, at least from a short term standpoint, it's probably a good idea to supplement with gabapentin. Actually, you know what? I think before gabapentin, I think you tried like pramipexole, Mirapex,
I did,
and then ropinirole, and you had really bad stomach side effects, right? I think it triggers you to get really severe nausea and vomit. Yeah, I think because those are common side effects to that medication.
Yeah, that wasn't an option for me. And I think everything was getting a little bit worse because at that time too, I also was, a lot more active, which also made my RLS, which is why we did start gabapentin. Because I think going into, we had a wedding at the end of that year and we just were being active. It was great. I was always active before, it was just part of the lifestyle, but I was noticing, it getting worse. So yeah, we did a combination.
Yeah, we did low dose gabapentin, I think. But then ultimately, from my recollection, you started sleeping through the night, right? Because I remember you mentioning that, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And you weren't requiring 9 hours of sleep. You were actually able to get up, because at that time you were still in commercial real estate. So, you were waking up early as well when I was, because you were having to drive to Phoenix, go to the office, but you're actually more alert. It was easier for you to get out of bed in the morning.
Yes.
And you weren't having to nap on the weekends also, right? And I remember you said, gosh, I do feel more awake and alert and energetic overall during the day. And even from my standpoint, because you weren't waking up to go to the bathroom at all, you were sleeping straight through and I was sleeping straight through the night. So we were both waking up with smiles on our faces.
Yeah,
right?
Marital bliss.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah. So, it was an interesting thing because I share this story with my patients all the time.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of laughs in terms of how we, quote unquote, kind of self-diagnose each other with sleep disorders. But if I was single, I probably would still have gone snoring and gasping and tossing and turning and thinking that I was great. And you probably would have been still peeing 3-4 times a night.
Probably would have been.
Yeah.
Staying in bed for 10 hours on the weekends because why not?
Kind of share your experience in terms of what you noted when you started sleeping better. Like, what were the things that you started noticing? Because you weren't excessively sleepy. You weren't irritable or grumpy. You're always a calm person. But like mentally, do you remember like what it was before and afterwards? Kind of like what I noticed about myself.
Yeah, for me, it was like the mental clarity. So I would have a hard time peeling myself out of bed. And I always felt that it was, I need more sleep, right? That always was the case. I wasn't someone that was relying on caffeine before. I didn't start drinking coffee until after we were together. So that wasn't it. But I did notice for me, it was the clarity and mental health. So, just a little bit of, history. I've always suffered from depression. So I'd been on depression medication for, early 90s. And so sleep and exercise for me are really important. And I think before I was associating sleep as my time logged in bed. And I was also thinking that that was all useful sleep. So what I was realizing was I was just getting inefficient sleep. So afterwards, I had the ability to just get time back. It was really difficult for me to get to places that I needed to go to at certain times because, I knew that I wouldn't wake up feeling ready to go. So I think that was one of the biggest changes for me was that I was able to go to bed, stay in bed, wake up and get going versus my prior routine, which was everything was a little bit delayed and a little bit foggy during those transition times for bedtime and for waking up. So that was a big change for me. It just was likely, the mental clarity and just the feeling that, I don't know, I was like revved up and ready to go versus, warming up the engine for, a good 60 minutes before I was ready to, join the world. So I think that was a big thing for me.
Even your sleep schedule changed too, because when we
It
were
did.
dating, you used to stay up till midnight, whereas I used to go to bed. I forced myself up to stay awake until like 10 o'clock just to keep talking to you. But then I'd crash and you'd still be awake for another 2 more hours, right? And now you go to bed. We go to bed, we're in bed by 8:30, but usually either I or you are falling asleep by 9 o'clock. And we're both collectively out by 9:30 the latest every single night now, right? And we both wake up early. But going back to your history of depression, do you remember any change in your mood from that standpoint once you started getting better quality sleep?
Yeah. I think at the time, it's really hard when you're in it because it's your norm, right? So even like when you're talking about your sleep, you didn't really know something was off because it just was your norm. And I had lived with a norm for such a long time. It wasn't anything that was overly, negative, dark cloud hanging over me, right? It's just the little subtle things. So for me, it just was that, I think it was the rev up the engine comment in terms of feeling like I was ready to go, not motivating myself ready to go over, an hour. So I think that was both physical and mental, and being able to, feel that I was ready to take on the day, which before would take me some time to get to, again, physically and mentally. So I think for me, mental health wise, I obviously notice a big difference how I feel even now. And you obviously experience that. We both experience it. We have mechanisms in place to help us through those times when we know that we need to be a little bit more patient with ourselves and give ourselves some time. But sleep is a huge factor because you're just, providing yourself the best opportunity to, work through all the tools you have when unpleasant things come in your way. So yeah, sleep is great.
Sleep is great.
Sleep is great when you sleep well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So, no, thanks for sharing. That's awesome. So, no, sleep is wonderful. I hope our stories have kind of explained the subtleties that can occur when you aren't getting good quality sleep. It doesn't have to be the obvious of what you see on TV, or because I never woke myself gasping and she never truly saw me stop breathing. Yeah, maybe there were a few times where she heard me gasping, which could have been also under the influence of alcohol, because even, a glass of wine it's a muscle relaxant, so it can cause your throat muscles to become more relaxed, where snoring can be more pronounced, especially on your back. And that can also trigger some people to kind of gasp, so to speak, right? And the person, him or herself that's doing it, doesn't realize it because they're asleep. So the bed partner can notice it. But ultimately, I'm thankful that I went through the process, because it really, personally, it's definitely made me a better person, because I feel like I function better, and I have now for the last 10 years. I would never go back to feeling that way. And the occasional times when I haven't slept well for various different reasons, most recently was just last month when our son was in our bed and he was literally kicking me in the ribs in the middle of the night. And it was dreadful, but it was a bad day. I remember I had a very busy day of meetings, and I was like, this is not going to be fun. But I drank a lot of caffeine that day to compensate, but it was a struggle. And if that's the way I felt to some degree pre-CPAP, man, I would never want to go back to that, right? But like you said, that was my norm pre-CPAP. That was my norm. I didn't realize it. And I truly didn't realize what true normal sleep was supposed to feel like. I thought I was sleeping well pre-CPAP, but there's no way. There's no way for any of us to know what true normal sleep is supposed to feel like until you actually taste it and feel it, right? So now my barometer for what's normal sleep is definitely different, right? In terms of, I know that it is possible, because Matthew Walker in his book, Why We Sleep, actually states that it's not normal to sleep through the night without any assistance. And my counter argument to that is that I don't agree with that. As my own patient, I don't take any sleep aids whatsoever. I haven't in over 15 years when I had my insomnia when I lived in Detroit. But truly, like with me. I put on my CPAP mask. I'm out within 10 seconds. I did stop the loud music, of course, years ago. So now ironically, if there's noise, I can't fall asleep. But I fall asleep in 10 seconds with my mask. My brain became conditioned to mask on means relax, go to sleep, but I'll sleep through the night unless something else wakes me. So yes, you can sleep through the night without any assistance, right? For me, what was disrupting my sleep was my breathing. That's corrected with CPAPs, keeping my throat open. I'm sleeping through the night. So it is normal to sleep through the night. And I can attest to that through thousands of patients of mine, that when things are corrected and the root cause is identified and we treat it, they actually are able to sleep through the night. And even for you, right? I mean, as long as you're taking your iron, I see a lot of bottles at home of Vitron C, so it looks like I gotta
just poke the bear.
Yep.
Yeah, and sleep is restorative. I think the other thing that everyone has to just, give yourself some slack. You're not going to sleep great every night. Don't fixate on it. Those are the things that are going to create issues. Recognize that in life, you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, right? And it's cumulative. So just keep that in mind. Whenever something happens, I always say, especially with our toddler, and if it's been difficult, I always say, like, tomorrow's a new day, right? Like, so if he's having a difficult time, I know that I have to be extra prepared to breathe through it and guide him and show him, how we handle difficult times. And then know that, again, tomorrow's a new day, clean slate. So same thing with sleep. That would be the recommendation from a non-sleep physician is, it's a roller coaster, but the more that you can make it consistent, it's better for you. Like we were saying, I mean, it's restorative. It's going to impact your mind and your body, and it's worth it. It's worth it to work on it.
Yeah, 100%. So in closing, if any of you listening or watching feel that there's potential room for improvement of your sleep or the way you feel the next day, get checked out. Schedule a visit with a sleep physician, ask your primary care physician for referral, and just at the very least meet with someone. Meet with a sleep specialist that can ask appropriate questions and determine, is there a potential that you could get better quality sleep. The trackers, that's such a, everyone's using trackers. I don't.
Yeah.
I tried an Oura Ring, I think last month, and the thing was giving me scores that I didn't agree with, and I was kind of yelling at my phone, like, what do you know? Like, I feel great, and you're telling me that I don't feel great. But the trackers are a good tool to kind of show
start the conversation.
Yeah, start the conversation and give you kind of an idea that, hey, why is my sleep so disrupted, or what's going on? But use that as a kind of a guide to say, hey, you know what? Maybe there is something going on that I just don't realize it. Like myself, back 10 years ago, and use that as kind of an intro into saying, hey, maybe I should explore determining how I can get better quality sleep, because better quality sleep results in improved longevity, improves metabolism. It actually improves brain health and reduces your risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease, reduces risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, atrial fibrillation, can minimize weight gain, improve physical performance, like I shared earlier. So there's all these benefits that one can get by just optimizing your sleep quality that we don't realize, right? So sleep is far more important than it's just an 8-hour period and a 24-hour day that our bodies rest, right? Which is what we were taught even in medical school 20 years ago. So I hope this was helpful. This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. Thanks, wife.
Yeah.
So, great.
Thanks for having me.